Welcome to the Green Hour. I'm Kirit Mukherjee with the Arlington Courthouse Greens. The Arlington Courthouse Greens were formed in 2001 and are affiliated with the Green Party of Virginia, which is in turn a member of the Green Party United States. Greens are open to all members who agree with our 10 key values. We are a grassroots people party with no ties or funding from corporations. The Arlington Courthouse Greens have worked on a number of issues in the community, including the Living Wage Campaign, which is a coalition of unions, activist groups, churches, and residents who lobbied the county board to pass an ordinance specifying a living wage in 2003. Other actions have included opposition to widening of I-66 and support for mass transit improvements. An undercurrent in many of these issues is the wide power, both locally and globally, of large corporations. Now, David Cobb, who was the Green Party's 2004 presidential candidate, has termed this situation a concentration of corporate power in our society. Paul Hughes, the co-chair of the Nova Greens, a local in Fairfax County, will outline the scope of why we need to challenge corporate power. Paul?
Thanks very much, Kirit. As kind of a context in this first showing of the Green Hour, I thought it might be helpful to kind of give an overall perspective on the fundamentals that lie behind many of the struggles that we're all dealing with and been engaged in for years: civil rights, economic democracy, social justice, the peace movement, and just kind of give a context within which these struggles all play out and why it's taking so long to overcome them. We've labeled the presentation today Ending Corporate Domination. And what that revolves around is that many of the kinds of issues many of us have worked on for many years have dealt more with the effects of corporate power while focusing less and less on institutions and rules that enable corporations to apply the power that is not only harming other human beings, but the planet as well. All the while that this wealth and power have been growing, they're doing so through trade and investment policies, through rules, and most fundamentally through corporate personhood defined through a series of legal decisions. The consequences of this are manyfold, and let's just take several of these that are most obvious. First of all, in government, we all know that the large corporations, particularly, not necessarily small corporations, but large ones, wield enormous political electoral power through campaign contributions and PAC groups and so forth. In society as a whole, the corporations enjoy actually more rights than human beings. And we'll get into some of that a little bit later. Many of the public functions are now being privatized. It used to be thoroughly and solely in the public sector. In the marketplace, mergers and monopolies over the last 10, 20, 30 years actually serve to reduce competition, and with each new merger and concentration of power in one institution, there's elimination of jobs as they seek to develop economies of scale. In the environment, many corporations despoil our forests, degrade the land, pollute air and water, and resist, in many cases, public health and safety regulations. As far as our culture is concerned, the effects of corporation permeate many of our music and art means of expression. The idea of promoting more consumption and materialism underlies many of these values that are propagated through these large corporations and media. The concentration in media is particularly kind of insidious because there's 3 or 4 major, maybe 5 major media organizations, very large, and they also have conflicts of interest in terms of their other corporate interests. GE, for instance, very heavily involved in nuclear and so forth, as well as media. Let's take a look at the legal definition of corporation. It's really an artificial person or legal entity that is created by a state in our particular country. It's composed of associations of numerous individuals, and it has a personality or existence that is distinct from its members. Now, what does that mean in practicality? It means it has the vested capacity of continuous succession. It's going to last whether the existing people there in current positions there or not, and there is usually no limit on its years that it can exist. It can exist in perpetuity. Acting as a unit or as a single individual, it can in effect take on a common purpose on behalf of that association. And within the scope of powers that it has, these are in many cases conferred by the legislative and judicial bodies by law. And we'll shortly see what that implication means. Let's take a look at human rights versus corporations. Humans, as we know, possess the rights of all natural persons. Actually, corporations do too. And this has been through a series of judicial decisions and interpretations over the last century. It can last forever. Obviously, we can't. Owners and investors are personally protected from financial liability. That's not the case with any of us. It's not the case generally with a small business, shoe shop, or a beauty salon, or so. They stand behind, their good name rather than a corporate veil. Humans cannot easily change their citizenship to avoid taxes. Corporations can. I think we're all familiar with the corporations offshore that are housed in the Bahamas and places like that specifically set up to avoid taxes and have a mailbox is about all they have there. You have lobbying and campaign contributions, which for corporations are deductible. If you or I make campaign contributions, they are not deductible. We go in and lobby Congress or our own congressman. Our expenses are not deductible. They are for a corporation. The parent is not responsible for its subsidiary for corporations. We as parents and with minor children, we're certainly responsible for their actions until they achieve the age of majority. SLAPP suits, which are done in many cases to dissuade public interest groups from pursuing various public interest causes, actually are a tax-deductible expense for business. Obviously, those kind of things would not, even taking on the suit itself, is not a tax-deductible expense for humans. False advertising is actually protected by free speech with corporations. With humans, that's not the case. If we slander someone or if we misrepresent ourselves, we can be hauled into court.
That would be the Nike case. That would be an example of that.
That'd be a good example. You're correct. Their corporations at least can sue government for the loss of future profits. And this happens under the WTO, the World Trade Organization provisions. We as humans obviously cannot sue the government for potential lost revenue in the future for things that they might be doing that we don't like. Number of ways that the wealthy and powerful have come to affect many of the things that we do. Obviously, the size and power of these organizations. I mentioned earlier the issue of mergers and consolidations that bring another wave of layoffs each time as they consolidate a lot of their back office functions and so forth. The influence of money in elections, I think, goes without saying. I think most of us are aware of that. Corporate welfare. You may not be aware of the extent to which corporations receive welfare versus individuals, and I'll have a good slide coming up on that for our viewers here shortly. And also the tax effort by corporations, which has continually gone down, and most recently, obviously, in the last 4 years with our most recent president and Congress. But this has been a trend that's been going on for the last 40 years, 50 years. Let's take the corporations and how they've acquired and how much power and wealth they've acquired. For example, 51 of the largest 100 economies are corporations. 1/3 of the world's trade in 1995, a couple years ago, was simply transactions among units of transnational corporations. Not even real bona fide trading, but just done for accounting purposes and tax reasons and so forth. Give you a sense of what corporations, the kind of power that corporations have acquired. Walmart in 1999, its sales were $166 billion. That alone was larger than 159 countries, among those being Poland, Norway, and Greece, just to give you a sense of what a conglomerate Walmart is. And let's stick with Walmart because it's certainly it represents a model that a lot of other businesses are looking to as a way of growing internationally. It also is an indication of just how many ways it can have an adverse effect on our culture and economy and so forth. In 2002, Walmart took in revenue $245 billion. Profits over $6.5 billion, has something like 4,700 stores worldwide, and has something like 138 million shoppers coming into its stores per week. The market share, and you then have to break down Walmart into a number of kinds of products it handles, just in household staples, staple goods, 30% of the U.S. market share, 15% of magazines, books, and clothing. It turns out it's the largest grocer in the United States, and that has implications for the other grocery chains and what they can, how they can compete with Walmart's low prices and so forth. It's the third largest pharmacy in the United States. It's the world's largest importer of Chinese-made goods, and 10% of all imports are from China, of U.S. imports are from China. And by the way, China, of course, is the biggest source for our current trade deficit. So Walmart is by no means helping us out in that area. Other statistics on Walmart, which I find quite interesting and telling, 82% of U.S. households made at least one purchase at Walmart last year. Almost 50% of Walmart's associates make less than $15,300 a year, which is the poverty level for a family of three. That comes to a little over $7 an hour, which is hardly a living wage. It's been passed, as Garrett was mentioning earlier, in places like Arlington and Montgomery County.
Is that for U.S. Walmart stores?
Yes, yeah. 44%, though, of their hourly employees turn over annually, which means they've got a very large expense and in terms of training new employees, but it also means a lot of people are not very satisfied with their working conditions and what they're getting paid. The months, for instance, for employees to be eligible for health insurance, for full-time employees is 6 months. For part-time, they've got to work there 2 years before they're eligible for any sort of medical care. So let's look at Walmart's impact in a number of areas. First, in an area of its suppliers. Its sheer size enables it to dictate what it buys, from whom, and at what price, thereby lowering the supplier wages and profits because the suppliers actually become dependent on this one purchaser as practically its sole source for its revenue. Local government pays incentives to attract the store. Usually some of their superstores averaging 150,000 square feet with extensive parking facilities and whatnot. This requires frequently expanded public infrastructure. If the locality is trying to woo that Walmart in that area, it means loss of tax revenues that they grant rebates and so forth to or tax incentives to the company to locate there. And of course, if they don't have health insurance for the time period I just mentioned, somebody has to pick up the employee's health and social service expenses, and that's you and I, the taxpayer. They foisted that kind of cost onto the taxpayer. From the standpoint of its competitors, and many of them are large and forced to be large to try to compete with them on an economy of scale basis, forces them to reduce their employees' wages to remain competitive, and it drives out, needless to say, smaller stores, hardware stores, tire stores, grocery stores, whatnot. That is the major thing or among the major things that Walmart offers. Employees is another area that they have a very negative effect in terms of the local economy. In terms of wages, I mentioned the a little over $7 an hour, which guarantees really a steady source of low-wage applicants if others in the community have to pay those low wages in order to be competitive and offer products and services at a lower price to compete with Walmart. And finally, I think many people may or may not know, I guess, Walmart is one of the most aggressive union-busting companies in the United States, and has taken a lead and is quite frankly proud of that reputation. Let's go over off from Walmart, go back to taking a look at the merger mania that we were referring to earlier. In 1995, over 1/2 of the sales of the largest 200 corporations were in just 5 economic sectors. That's how great the domination is in those 5 sectors. In autos, the top 5 firms account for almost 60% of global sales. In electronics, again, the top 5 firms garnered over 1/2 of the global sales. And top 5 firms have over 30% of global sales in the fields of airlines, aerospace, steel, oil, personal computers, media, and chemicals. So there's a very high concentration of companies within industries, almost an oligopoly, which means they can do a lot to control prices and the market in those industries. From 1998 to 2000, there were $3.7 trillion in mergers in the United States. In 1999, U.S. corporations struck mergers worth $1.75 million in just 1 year. And in 1998, of course, 678 Americans were laid off from their job, the highest total in a decade, and 2.3 million have been laid off just since 2001. From a corporate versus human welfare standpoint, and this is a little dated figure, but it certainly, if anything, has gotten worse since then. Tax breaks for corporations in 1994, including various kinds of tax breaks like credits or deductions, exclusions from their corporate income tax, or direct subsidies and assistance, totaled $1.4 billion. People, individuals, humans, who receive child welfare, food stamps, nutrition, housing, public assistance, only received $75 billion. So fully $25 billion more went for corporations just in 1994 than it did to humans. So don't ever let someone, downgrade, the welfare system as it is, because certainly for humans it's not working as well as it is for corporations. Corporations, of course, large ones, have gotten very adept at avoiding taxes. For instance, none of the 44 U.S. corporations, according to the Institute of Policy Studies report, paid the full corporate income tax rate from 1996 to 1998. They found enough deductions, et cetera, that none paid the full corporate tax rate, which was around 35% at that point. 7 of these corporations netted 0 taxes paid in 1998. These included such large and well-known companies as Texaco, Chevron, PepsiCo, Enron, WorldCom, McKesson, and General Motors, which happens to be the world's largest corporation. Mentioned earlier the adeptness at which corporations have managed to elude their tax responsibilities over the years. This particular graph that your viewers will see is focused on the amount that corporations paid as a percent of federal tax collections. And you can see from 1940s to today, corporations cut their tax rate in half, essentially from 33 to 15%, while personal income tax collection went from 43 to 73% of total federal tax collections. So you can see that's a very steep drop, and that's only been extended even more deeply for corporations over the last 4 years. Corporations exert undue influence on elections. As I mentioned, I think we know that. In the 2000 federal election, corporations outspent labor 15 to 1. 1994, 5 energy corporations gave $30 million to federal candidates. They later received $34 billion in tax breaks and subsidies. That amounts to about 114% return on your, 114 times return on your investment. That's pretty significant. I don't think any of us have ever seen a return on that kind of investment in any of our personal holdings. Between 1997 and 98, of course, the lobbying by the tobacco companies when they were under federal grand jury indictments and so forth actually increased, as you would expect, 1.8 times their contribution to various lobbying efforts, from 38 million to 67 million.
And the point here, Paul, is that what do they expect in return for that type of contribution?
And we know that elected officials listen to those who do contribute to them. I mean, there's a quid pro quo implied, if not specific. Corporate influence expands as the public sphere shrinks. In 2000, Business Week and the Harris poll showed that some 77% of U.S. adults believe that corporations have gained too much power over American life. And I think some of the things I've just been describing indicate how great that is. The public sphere of decision-making is shrinking with increased privatization of services formerly provided through the public sector. Water is a prime example of that. But you see in the federal government the desire of the last couple administrations to start making civil servants and areas of the civil servant corps actually have to compete for their jobs against private sector companies. I mentioned air, water, land. These continue to be sinks for industry and business. This is where a lot of their pollution goes. For them, it's a no-cost outlet for some of their waste products that we as taxpayers, of course, have continued to get stuck making the payments on. Water privatization increasing down to and including water bottles you buy at the store. I mean, who would have ever thunk that we would actually be buying water at local stores? I mean, what's wrong with perfecting our public water supply? If anything is as fundamental as water, that certainly ought to be a public service and not privatized. The shrinking public space for assembly, as we have shopping centers and so forth that have replaced kind of the town square and so forth, you're not able to petition for candidates on private property. You're not able to hold public meetings on private shopping center grounds. All this, hotels, whatever, all these are privately owned, and they have control over what affects their customers and so forth. So from the standpoint of public space and having a town square where people can meet and argue and discuss political issues and so forth, that's going by the by because there's fewer and fewer places to actually conduct those activities. We have situations where corporations are actually patenting plants and animal genetic material, things that indigenous people have used for hundreds, thousands of years, all of a sudden now become a pharmaceutical company's next ticket to profit. You look at auctioning of public radio and TV airwaves. These, for sure, are public-owned property, and what we're doing is finding that is essentially being auctioned off to the private sector for their own personal use. We have situations with access to public decisions being more and more restricted. The WTO, World Trade Organization, most people don't even know that exists. They don't know how the decisions are made. They certainly don't know who the people are that are making the decisions, most of which are made in secret, and many of which affect us down to the local level in terms of the kinds of things that can be done. The right to sue corporations has been restricted more and more for individuals if there are problems, and it's very hard to get through to those. I'll briefly touch upon, just to give you an example of the various media concentrations here. And you look at Disney, Viacom, AOL, Time Warner, and General Electric as essentially the owners of what goes into your, and CNN, of course, goes into your house. The labor situation over the last 40, 50 years has been steadily going down in terms of union membership. We're now looking at a point where there's something less than 13% that are in effect unionized people in this country. Various kinds of trade agreements are being used as a way for subverting. We've gone? I couldn't.
No, you've got a few minutes to wrap up.
Okay. From the standpoint of trade, global treaties represent interests of corporations very much over the environment, workers, and communities. Trade treaties like NAFTA and GATT have proposed various kinds of rules that benefit corporations rather than individuals that, in effect, allow the environment to be desecrated, allow lower wages to be paid to people just about anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, including this country, if they want to save their jobs, weakened worker rights, and from the standpoint of the environmental damage, I think many of us know that that is being undermined by many of the World Trade GATT type of agreements. One of the final slides I have, or the final slide I have here, really kind of just summarizes how all this has led to the rise of big campaign contributors, corporate lobbyists, corporations, investors, and Wall Street really making the decisions across the board, culturally, socially, governmentally, etc., over the last 40 years. And correspondingly, you see the decline in the influence and power of voters, labor unions, wage earners, employees, and even Main Street businesses. And what I've tried to do in a very, very quick fashion, I apologize for kind of running through this quickly in the time available, but more or less to set the context for what we hope will be future discussions about some of the issues that are in effect extended in terms of the struggle because of the corporate domination in these various industries. And maybe we can then focus in a future date on how we can address this and begin to end corporate domination as it exists in this country today. So with that, Carrot, I turn it back to you.
Basically, you've given us an introduction to the topic, and a lot more things have to be looked at. But you've sketched out the challenging corporate domination introduction.
And it's really the idea that many of us, it's kind of the old picture of the elephant, where each person feels a different part of the elephant. Some of us working on the environment, others on the peace movement, others on economic justice. And yet underlying all of this is corporations.
Thank you very much, Paul, and I guess that'll conclude the Green Show for today.
Thanks.